In the southern Piedmont section of North Carolina, in the northeast corner of what is now Cabarrus County, there is a tiny piece of farmland hidden deep in the woods. Follow a path back into the woods to find what remains of an old road that is now overgrown with trees and hardly recognizable. Going further leads to an open field, the highest point in the area. Past the open field lies an even smaller parcel of land where an obscured monument stands commemorating the beginnings of the Dutch Buffalo Creek Meeting House. Established as a Union church for the German settlers in the new land, it was the coming together of those of German Reformed and Lutheran heritage.
You don't know what the property looked like in early 1700s. But I'm assuming that the open field there was open at that time and the rest was woods. The cemetery, I always thought people would come with metal detectors and go down in the woods, down the hill toward the creek. And I would say, I can't believe there's any graves down there. People are not going to bury on a slope. When you've got this more flat land out here, they're going to bury out here. If the old road was in front of the church, then the cemetery or the church was in the center of the cemetery, my opinion is that the church was out in the open, out in the where the pasture field is now, with the cemetery around it and the road in front of the church.
They brought with them their Bibles, their catechisms, their hymnals, and their Christian faith. And once established here in the Dutch Buffalo Creek area, they began building the meeting house, which served dual purpose as a church and school building. It was important to them that they immediately begin teaching their children the fundamentals of education, as well as increase their knowledge of the Bible. Our forefathers came down from Pennsylvania into North Carolina due to a shortage of farmland. The land in Pennsylvania was already parceled out and claimed, which drove the German settlers further south, through the Shenandoah Valley area and into the Piedmont area of North Carolina. They came down by way of the Great Wagon Road, which was developed from a series of Native American trails into the most heavily used migration route in the English colonies. Although some northern parts of the trail were used by settlers in the 1720s, it wasn't until 1744 that a treaty with the Iroquois nation gave the English colonies full control of the path in Pennsylvania. The road extended down through the Shenandoah Valley on into South Carolina and Georgia by 1763. On horseback, the settlers traveled around 20 miles per day. Travel was slow as they were going through the Shenandoah Valley and the rugged Blue Ridge Mountains. Weather conditions meant that the road was typically either dusty or a muddy mess, and along the way they had to keep up with their animals, oxen, horses, cows, chickens, and pigs. Sometimes the road became rough and difficult, and the travelers had to disassemble their wagons and carry them piece by piece along with their belongings until the road leveled out. For some, their sole possessions had to be left by the pathways. As was expected, wagon components broke, floods occurred due to tremendous rainfall, supplies dwindled, and sickness would slow their travel. Yet they persevered in the most adverse of conditions. These were the same hardy folks who sailed across a dangerous ocean for religious freedom and opportunities for better lives for their families. They were confident that God would guide them in their long, treacherous journey. Vast areas of suitable farming land was waiting for them in the Dutch Buffalo Creek area of the southern Piedmont region. According to John H. Wheeler's work on the history of North Carolina, it is generally accepted that Scot-Irish settlers moved into the western and southern portions of what is now Cabarrus County. They claimed the richer, fertile blackjack lands there, while the German settlers arriving in the 1740s amiably entered the eastern portion of the county, claiming the land on both sides of Dutch Buffalo Creek. It's unclear when the creek obtained its official name. It is believed that the Native Americans lived in this region and hunted the buffalo which roamed the countryside. The Dutch, anglicized word for Deutsch or German, was adopted by the inhabitants. But they were not alone. Native American tribes occupied the region and hunted buffalo. Here, local historian Ronald Herlocker explains.
Like the Cherokee and the Catawba, Tuscarora, Indians and all that roamed this land, and because a lot of buffalo in this area. And also it was called the Dutch Buffalo Creek. Was the Dutch really comes from, means German. It's really not the Dutch people, it's German. And in those days, I imagine the Buffalo Creek was much bigger than it is now, because you go down there, it's just a little, not much to it anymore. But anyway, the Indians was there, and it says in the early 1700s, which would be before 1745, early years, it says the Germans and the Scotch-Irish ran all the Indians out. They ran them out. So, but they had been here like 1,200 years before the white man ever got here. But you know how that didn't work out. Now going back to Dutch Buffalo Creek, they were there prior to 1745. But the date that the church recognizes is when the church started, or the meeting house started, was in 1845 is what they officially recognized. But they were living there before, you know, in the earlier 1700s.
The Dutch Buffalo Creek Meeting House was the first German Reformed and German Lutheran church to be established in the Piedmont section of North Carolina, early in the 1740s. The original meeting house was built and established in 1745. It's about 2 miles north of present-day Mount Pleasant, North Carolina. It was called a meeting house instead of a church because the settlers had been given permission to travel from Germany to America by Queen Anne, and the Church of England was the only official church recognized in the colonies. Any other type of assembly was called a meeting house. As mentioned earlier, the settlers brought with them from their homelands their Bibles, their catechisms, their hymnals, and their Christian faith. These were just as important to them as their household utensils and farming tools, which were essential to their survival. To their credit, they proceeded to build a church that also doubled as a school building as soon as they were established in their crude and primitive homes. The Dutch Buffalo Creek Meeting House was established as the first church in the Piedmont for both the German Reformed and the German Lutherans. It was used not only for worship, but also for community gatherings and a school for children. They believed in teaching their children the fundamentals of the Christian faith and in the importance of providing a basic education in reading, writing, and arithmetic, as well as knowledge of the Holy Bible. Services were conducted in German, mainly by the schoolmaster, since there was no regular pastor each Sunday. Records confirm that marriages, funerals, and baptisms were often conducted by the teacher. When a minister was in the area, local residents would travel as far as 40 miles by horseback or wagon to attend services, be baptized, receive communion, get married, or attend weddings or funerals. For some people, this would mean a 1 to 3 day trip. The traveling minister was in the pulpit usually once a month, since he had other areas in which his ministerial services were needed. The schoolmaster typically read sermons published by other preachers on the other 3 Sundays, sometimes 4, as part of the expectations of a schoolmaster. 21 families were recorded as German Reformed and 28 families as German Lutheran. Several members counted themselves as part of both denominations, and there are several families with the same last name, but the name is only recorded once in the member list. Those wondering why settlers from two different denominations might opt to establish a union meeting house, basically, a shortage of pastors and a lack of meeting houses made the union church of both Reformed and Lutheran necessary, but church fellowship meant more to them in the 1740s than a church denomination. It is refreshing to learn about the devotion of our forefathers to the church and their Christian faith at a time when bare physical existence was a difficult job. Their deep dedication to the Bible and the truths they knew there fortified them for the difficulties of the day and enabled them to bequeath to their posterity a wonderful heritage, both in the country which they helped to establish and build and in the Reformed and Lutheran Church which has meant so much to us. We are deeply indebted to them for this Dutch Buffalo Creek Church and other of our older congregations from which many of our present congregations have come. We must take the torch from their hands, hold it high, keep it alight, and pass it on to generations to come after us.